Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel Book Grip. My name is Rajni. I'm an author and an avid reader. Today I was planning to wear something really good, have a good backdrop, create an interesting content for my audience, but unfortunately I'm not that person. I'm a very simple person. I don't get dressed often, and you get what you see with me, but you will definitely get good recommendations that I can guarantee and honest book reviews. So I was planning to do a long form content around the books that I read in the month of July. I don't get too many views on my long form content. Not many people engage with my content. So it's my request that if you'll engage more with my content, it will encourage me to create more interesting content. So without further ado, let me jump right into the list of books that I read for this month. So, looking at this month's reading pile, I realized that there wasn't a single easy book in it. Every book challenged me in some way. So, if one book took me into the rebellious literary circles of 1960s India, another took me to the ruins of Syria during the Civil War. I finally picked up a feminist book, and then I ended up with reading a dystopian novel. It is actually a translated work. So this book, it was translated from Hindi to English, and the original book was written by Rajkamal Chaudhury, and it was translated into English by Maua Sen. So the book's name is The Dead Fish. So it was translated from Rajkumar Chaudhury's Machli Mari. So this is the book, and this book had me. This is a very emotionally disturbing book. So before talking about this book, you should know about the writer of this book. So Rajkamal Chaudhury, I knew very little about him because I don't read Hindi literature much, unfortunately, because that is not a language that I'm comfortable reading in. I'll take a lot of time to finish reading that, so I don't read much, but I'm planning to read more of Hindi literature. The more fascinating he became to me. He was closely associated with the Hungry generation, which was a radical literary movement that emerged in India during the 1960s. So these writers weren't interested in polite. They wanted to rebel against every institution they believed crushed individual freedom. So whether it was society in general, morality, or family, or even literature itself. So this movement was started in Bengal, if I'm not wrong. So you can feel the rebellion by the author throughout this novel. So the story revolves around a wealthy businessman who appears powerful on the outside, but he is emotionally fractured. His relationships are messy, his desires are contradictory, and beneath the confidence lies an overwhelming sense of emptiness. What I loved about this book is the psychology part of it, how disturbing it is for the reader, and the, I think, writer would also have gone through some disturbing phase while writing this book. So Rajkamal isn't interested in creating heroes or villains. He was more focused in exposing people exactly as they are: confused, selfish, vulnerable, and deeply lonely. So, the image of the dead fish, that is the title of the book, keeps surfacing throughout the novel. It becomes this haunting metaphor for emotional decay, stagnant relationships, suffocated desires, and lives that have somehow stopped moving. So, I really loved this book. I think some part of the books, the flow in the story may have gotten, may have gotten little haywire in translation. What amazed me even more was how openly the novel talks about homosexuality and sexual identity. Remember, this book was written in the 1960s when these conversations were almost unheard of in Indian literature. So this book, it's bold, it's provocative, it's uncomfortable, only if you can manage something that will disturb you mentally. And honestly, discovering Rajkamal Chaudhury was probably one of the highlights of my reading month. I'll get on to my next book. That was a light read. That is The Kidnapping of Mark Twain by Andrada Kumar. So I picked up The Kidnapping of Mark Twain by Andrada Kumar just because of this beautiful cover, and also because the title of the book had the name Mark Twain, and I had to pick up this book. Now, this is exactly kind of the premise that immediately gets me excited. That is Mark Twain's visit to Bombay, which was, if I'm not wrong, in 1896, and build a complete fictional mystery around it. I was all for it. I was completely sold to that premise. The opening chapters are genuinely gripping. The writing is really good. You are immediately invested because you know Mark Twain really visited India, and you start wondering, what if something like this had really happened during his visit? But this book slowly started losing its flow, and it fizzled out for me along the way. Many characters began crowding the story, subplots started pulling the narrative in different directions, and by the time I reached the climax, the resolution didn't feel as satisfying as set up as the premise promised. But I would recommend you can read it once if you are a Mark Twain fan. So, and it is one of those books that had an incredible idea but didn't quite stick the landing. But hats off to the effort of the writer. If you'll ask me, did I enjoy reading it? Yes. Did I think it could have been better? Again, yes. Then the another book that I read this month was, you know, deeply emotionally scarring. I mean, I don't know why I picked up reading this book. To read this book, the book's name is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katuh. I am sure I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but anyways. So this book was without question my favorite book of the month, and also emotionally scarring book. I love novels that make me stop reading every few chapters just so I can, look up the history behind them. And this book made me do that. I generally avoid reading books that are written in the war torn regions. But I had to pick this up because I read so much about it on social media. So, as long as the lemon trees grow follows Salma or Salama, an 18-year-old pharmacy student whose life is shattered by the Syrian Civil War. So, after losing members of her family, she volunteers at a hospital treating victims of bombings while constantly battling survivors' guilt. Every day, she wonders whether she should flee Syria to save herself or stay behind to help those who cannot leave. Then she meets the love of her life, Kenan, and what unfolds isn't just a love story, it is a story about choosing hope when everything around is falling apart, is collapsing. The writing is smooth and flowy, and what makes this novel even more heartbreaking is knowing the fact that how much of its backdrop is rooted in reality. So I went back and checked to see whether what she wrote is real, and it was real, and that really broke my heart. So, the history behind this story is that in 2011, a group of schoolboys in the Syrian city of Dara wrote anti government graffiti mocking the president Bashar al Assad, who, had, who was a doctor himself, but he was a dictator. The boys were arrested, tortured, and abused. Public outrage over their treatment sparked protests that eventually spiraled into one of the most devastating civil wars of the 21st century. So, this book is set with that backdrop. Millions were displaced, entire cities were reduced to rubble. So, an entire generation grew up, knowing nothing but conflict in Syria. And there is an irony that the person who was responsible for all this was a doctor who was supposed to be a healer but ended up becoming the destructor of this generation. So, another interesting fact of this novel is that it introduced me to a genre that is called as halal romance. So I had heard the term before, but had never really explored it. So halal romance generally refers to stories where love develops within Islamic values. The emphasis is on emotional intimacy, respect, faith, and commitment rather than explicit physical relationships. I found that refreshing because the romance here grows through conversations, shared grief, and moments of hope. It never distracts from the war. Instead, it reminds you why people continue to fall in love even when the world is trying to destroy them, or even when the world is collapsing around them. And honestly, that's what stayed with me long after I finished reading this book. So, the next book, that is the fourth book I read, was completely different from my other three earlier books. And the book's name is The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. I finally got to read Simone de Beauvoir. I have owned The Second Sex, which is her another more popular book, for a while now. But strangely, this book became my first introduction to her writing. Most people know Beauvoir as one of the most influential existentialist philosophers alongside Jean Paul Sartre. So I really love the cover of this book as well. Anyways, so existentialism is deeply concerned with freedom, identity, responsibility, and the choices we make in life. But before picking up her philosophy, I wanted to experience her fiction. That is the reason I picked up this book. And also, as I said, I really loved the cover of this book. Is actually a collection of three novellas, and each explores women standing at moments where their identities begin to unravel. So each story explores women standing at moments where their identities begin to unravel: aging, loneliness, marriage, motherhood, infidelity. So the final novella, which gives the book its title, is especially devastating. So the final novel, it's written as a diary, and through these entries, we watch a woman slowly realize that the life she believed was secure has quietly fallen apart after discovering her husband's affair. And the last book that I actually read this month was Vanishing World by Sayaka Murata. She's a Japanese author. She said Murata has a very particular talent. She takes something we consider completely normal and simply asks, but why? And somehow by the end of the novel, you are questioning your own assumptions instead of hers. So if you have read Convenience Store Woman, you will know how brilliantly she critiques society's obsession with fitting in. So if you have read Earthlings, well, you will know why so many readers recommend going into that book completely blind. It's disturbing, bizarre, and unforgettable. Similarly, Vanishing World continues that tradition. It's disturbing, it's bizarre, it's creepy to some extent, and it's set in a future where the very idea of family has been reimagined. I mean, marriage barely exists in that future. Normal copulation, normal sex is considered abnormal, and childbirth through artificial insemination is considered the normal of that the future. And at first, the world that she has presented in this near future dystopian world feels absurd. Then something strange happens. You begin adapting to it. And that's exactly what Murata wants. Then, lastly, I will talk about the books that I started reading but didn't finish. So, those books I read in my Kindle, and some books it didn't sit well with me. Some books were difficult for me, and some I just couldn't finish. So, I started with Lolita. Now, before anyone says, but it's a literary masterpiece, I know it's a literary masterpiece. Nabokov's prose is extraordinary, but I personally couldn't get past the subject matter. Reading from the perspective of a pedophile was simply too disturbing for me, so I decided to put it aside. I came halfway through, but it was getting under my skin. It felt too creepy for me. Maybe I'll return it to one day, maybe I won't. I'm also still wrestling with another great novel, that is Ulysses. James Joyce clearly wasn't writing that book, Ulysses, for proletarian class. He was writing it for God, because who writes a book like that? I couldn't understand anything. I'm taking my time with that one, but hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll finish reading that book. Then I also need to get back to Cixin Liu's The Dark Forest. I absolutely love The Three Body Problem. I have reviewed that book, so I'm hoping to continue that journey next month. That's everything I read this month. And looking back, I think the common thread running through all these books was people trying to survive, whether it was within broken relationships, broken political systems, or broken societies. Some books I loved, some books exhausted me, but every single one gave me something to think about, something to take away with me. Now, I would love to know what was your favorite read this month, or what you are reading this month. Leave your recommendations in the comments, because my TBR is already completely out of control. I don't mind some more book recommendations there. And if you enjoy conversations that go beyond book reviews, where literature meets history, philosophy, and politics, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to your recommendations, your love, and I hope you enjoy this video. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching.